Friends who visited the ranch during this period noted the bond between man and dog. Clint talks to Duke like he's a person, one friend observed. Not in a crazy way, but like he's working through things out loud. And Duke is his sounding board. And Duke was a good listener. He would watch Clint with those intelligent eyes, head tilted slightly, as if considering whatever the legendary director was wrestling with. Sometimes Clint swore the dog understood. Not just the emotion, but the actual content of these one-sided conversations. "Should I do another film?" Clint asked Duke one evening in late 2018. "Or should I call it quits? End on a high note?" Duke's tail thumped twice against the porch floor. "That's not really an answer, buddy." Another tail thump. Clint laughed, a genuine laugh that had become rarer in recent years. Okay. I'll take that as encouragement." He committed to The Mule in 2018, a project that felt personal in ways his other films hadn't. A story about an old man trying to find redemption, trying to make peace with his choices, trying to matter in a world that had moved past him. The parallels to his own life weren't subtle. Duke was older now, 15 years old, which was remarkable for a German shepherd. His muzzle was completely grey, his movements careful and calculated. He could no longer jump into Clint's truck, but had to be lifted. He tired more easily, slept more deeply. Clint found himself constantly checking on Duke, making sure he was comfortable, that he was eating enough, that the pain medication was working. The roles had reversed in some ways. Duke had taken care of Clint emotionally through the dark years. Now Clint was taking care of Duke physically through his decline. "We've got to keep each other going," Clint told the dog, scratching behind his ears with the gentleness of long practice. "You and me were not done yet." The shoot for The Mule was Clint's most personal in years, partly because he was acting in it as well as directing, his first on-screen role since Gran Torino a decade earlier. Looking at himself in the monitor, seeing the weathered face and the age in his eyes, Clint understood viscerally what Duke had been teaching him for years, that aging wasn't weakness, that slowing down wasn't surrender, that there was dignity in acknowledging limitations while still pushing forward. He wrapped the film in 2018, exhausted but satisfied. It would be released in late 2018 to strong reviews, with critics noting a tenderness in Clint's performance that hadn't been present in his earlier work, a vulnerability that age and experience had earned him the right to show. But Duke wouldn't see the film's release. In October 2018, Duke's health declined rapidly. The arthritis worsened, spreading to his spine. He began having difficulty eating, difficulty standing. The vet delivered the news that Clint had been dreading. They were nearing the end, and soon the kindest thing would be to let Duke go. Clint took a week off from post-production. He spent every moment with Duke, sleeping on the floor beside the dog's bed, hand-feeding him favorite treats, talking to him in low, steady tones about all the years they'd shared. "You got me through, buddy," Clint whispered one night, his voice breaking in a way that hadn't happened since he was a young man. "When I wanted to give up, you kept me going. You were there when no one else was. You never judged, never asked for anything except to be near me. That's the purest friendship I've ever known." Duke's tail moved slightly weakly in acknowledgement. On a grey November morning, with the Pacific fog rolling across the ranch, Clint made the call. The veterinarian came to the house. No clinic, no sterile environment. Duke would leave this world in the place he'd called home, in the arms of the man he'd loved. Clint held Duke as the injection was administered, felt the exact moment when the dog's breathing stilled, when the weight in his arms became absolute stillness. He stayed there for a long time, just holding him, not ready to let go of the physical presence, even though he knew Duke's spirit had already moved on. They buried Duke on a hill overlooking the property, under an oak tree, where they'd often sat together during morning walks. Clint designed the headstone himself, simple, understated, just like Duke had been. Duke, 2004-2018, loyal friend, good dog. The grief hit harder than Clint expected. He'd lost parents, lost colleagues, lost relationships, but losing. Duke carved out a hollow space that nothing seemed to fill. The house felt empty in a way it never had before. The routines that had sustained him now emphasized Duke's absence, the morning walk taken alone, the evening porch time spent in solitary silence. For weeks, Clint struggled. He threw himself into work, finishing post-production on the Mule with an intensity that worried his team. But work could only distract for so long. Eventually, he had to return to the ranch, to the quiet, to the absence. It was Scott, his son, who finally intervened. He showed up at the ranch unannounced one afternoon and found Clint sitting on the porch, staring at nothing. "Dad," Scott said gently, "you need to talk about this." "Nothing to talk about," Clint replied, his voice gruff. "Dog died. That's what happens. He wasn't just a dog to you." Clint was silent for a long moment. Then no, he wasn't. And finally Clint talked. About the years after the divorce, about the health scares, about feeling old and irrelevant and scared in ways he'd never admitted to anyone, about how Duke had been his anchor, his companion, his reason to keep going when giving up seemed easier. "I don't know who I am without him," Clint admitted. And the vulnerability in those words, from a man who had built a career on stoic toughness, was profound. Scott stayed at the ranch for a week, just being present, offering the kind of quiet support that Duke had provided. And slowly Clint began to find his footing again. He started going through old photos, hundreds of pictures of Duke over the years. Duke as a young dog on film sets, Duke grey-muzzled and dignified in recent years. Duke and Clint together, two warriors aging side by side. Clint began writing, not scripts but memories. Stories about Duke, about what those years of solitude and companionship had meant, about the lessons an old dog had taught an old man about grace, loyalty, and finding purpose in simple presence. He showed these writings to no one. They were private, personal, a way of processing grief, of honoring a friendship that had saved him in ways he was only beginning to understand. By early 2019, Clint felt ready to move forward. Not to forget Duke, never that, but to carry the lessons forward, to honor the dog's memory by living fully for whatever time remained. He committed to another film, Richard Jewell, diving into work with renewed purpose. But he was different now, softer in some ways, more open about his vulnerabilities, more willing to admit when he needed help or rest. "Duke taught me that," he told a journalist who asked about his changed demeanor, "that there's strength in admitting weakness, that you don't have to prove anything to anyone. You just have to show up, be present, and do your best. That's all any of us can do." The ranch remained quiet without Duke's presence, but Clint didn't rush to fill that void with another dog. The grief was still too fresh, the loss too recent. Maybe someday, but not yet. He established a scholarship, fund in Duke's name at the local animal shelter, helping other dogs find homes. Other people find companions like Duke had been for him. It felt right, a way of extending Duke's impact beyond their individual relationship. Friends noticed the change in Clint, a mellowness that hadn't been there before, a willingness to slow down and appreciate moments rather than always rushing toward the next project. He spent more time with his children, reached out to old friends, allowed himself to be vulnerable in ways that earlier versions of himself would have considered weakness. "Duke saved my life," Clint told his daughter one afternoon as they walked the property together. "I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. There were times during those years when I didn't see the point of continuing. But I had to get up for him, had to keep going for him. And by the time he was gone, I'd remembered how to keep going for myself." The years no one talks about, 2015 to 2019, weren't glamorous or newsworthy by Hollywood standards. There were no blockbuster releases, no major awards, no headline-grabbing moments. Just an aging man and his aging dog, helping each other through the hardest part of life. The realization that time is finite, that loss is inevitable, that grace in aging is perhaps the greatest challenge any of us face. Duke was gone, but his impact remained, in how Clint approached his work now, in how he treated others, in how he thought about legacy and meaning. The dog had been a mirror, reflecting back the things that truly mattered, not fame or success or recognition, but loyalty, presence, and unconditional love. On quiet evenings, Clint still sat on the porch at sunset. Sometimes he could almost feel Duke's presence beside him, not a ghost, but a memory so strong it felt physical. The weight of a head on his knee, the sound of steady breathing, the comfort of companionship that asked nothing and gave everything. "Thank you, buddy," Clint would whisper into the twilight, "for everything." The years no one talks about had been the hardest of Clint Eastwood's long life, but they had also been transformative, humbling, necessary. And through all of it, a loyal German shepherd had been there, not judging, not demanding, just being present. Duke had been more than a pet, more than a companion. He had been a teacher, a therapist, a friend, a lifeline. And though his time had been finite, his lessons were eternal. Clint Eastwood would go on to direct more films, to receive more accolades, to add to his legendary career. But those quiet years with Duke, the years Hollywood didn't see, the years no one talks about, remained the most important of his life. Because in those years, when everything else had stripped away, when he was just an aging man facing his mortality, Duke had shown him what truly mattered. Not the applause or the awards, but the simple act of showing up for someone you love, of being present through the hard times, of finding purpose in companionship. The ranch in Carmel by the Sea still stands, quieter now, and on a hill overlooking the property under an ancient oak tree. A simple headstone marks where a very good dog rests, having lived a life of purpose and having left behind a legacy that transcends words. Duke, 2004-2018, loyal friend, good dog. The greatest role anyone could play.